Here we go. Are we ready? I'll just make a couple of comments and then pass the mic along. My biggest takeaway was David Orr's presentation yesterday. I think he blew away the crowd with his tour de force about the climate situation. So I was particularly impressed with Dr. Orr. And perhaps also the National Security Council had put it summed it up as best as anyone can. It's this problem is real, it's urgent, and it's severe. So if that's coming from the National Security Council, I think we better pay attention to that. Not to mention the Greenland independence.
So there were a couple of things that came out in our discussion. One of which was, I think it came out clearly in the morning sessions, particularly that how adaptation issues really need to be viewed in a broader context. That's not simply how do we respond to the natural hazard, but how do you build resilient communities that are robust. And so that when you're taking, when we think about, well, why is there disaster money? It's money that is coming, it may be coming out of somewhere else in the budget that also is supporting important needs. But in some cases, some of this rebuilding we can do, it can actually build communities that are stronger on many axes and not simply on the response to natural hazards. Another point we thought was important was the importance of looking at why behaviors exist and sort of the historical context, as well as just, how do we get to, what would we like to see in the future?
All right, this group. We have a mic here. Oh, you have one? Okay.
Yes, sir. Hi, Justin Schaffer. So one of the most surprising and noteworthy aspects to me, or I give two, is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so one was David Orr's presentation as well, which kind of inspired me in a way when he said that, we are seeing the effects of current climate change that, I guess, occurred 30 years ago. And
the carbon that was emitted 30 years ago.
Right, yeah. So we've actually yet to see the effects of what we are doing today. So that kind of really highlighted the sense of urgency to me and will probably help me be able to advocate that to the rest of my generation. Additionally, some of the talks about environmental justice and opening my mind to the whole aspect that there are certain groups that are not able to be are not able to access these types of discussions and debates and are not able to contribute. And these are typically the groups that are affected the most by this. So that stuff was all very interesting to me. Thank you.
All right, anybody from this group?
Stick with this group for another minute. Are you guys done? You got a big group.
One thing that
You guys are jumping up again.
I agree with some of the other comments. One of the things that really struck me was, which I think relates as sort of a barrier, is one thing that's been great about this symposium, getting these different points of view, real diverse points of view, but you also see very different ideas about sort of how to proceed, and I certainly endorse the issue of some of the groups that don't have power, that are ordinarily excluded, and the presentations we made about how to include the community. But there are also more of the private sector approaches. We've seen some different points of view as to how to proceed, so I think it was, in a way, it was a surprise, and it's a real accomplishment, I think, for the organizers to get these different points of view in one symposium and trying to, how does one move forward, because getting an agreement on a target as to what it means to be resilient is actually, I think, related to those different points of view. So that was kind of a surprise and very interesting.
What's a lesson that you might take home to your office or to your neighbors and your communities?
So what our group talked about was kind of the surprise, and the answer to your question here is the need to integrate collaboration and stepping out of your silo into your goals. Because it can't just be a moment at a conference. It needs to be part of your work process so that people are actually finding their mutual points of intersection and working across the needed lines.
Any groups want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I was really particularly struck by Marcy Rockman's talk because it highlighted some really important examples about looking at the history of where we've been coming from rather than just starting at our current point and looking ahead. And I thought it was really poignant. To me, as a natural scientist especially, we've for a long time talked about bringing a different, the whole array of people to the table and bringing in stakeholders, but this part was more new to me in that it highlighted the science that social scientists offer, and I thought it was a really valuable lesson, and I appreciate you guys. So, big up.
We had one member of our group brought up towards the end of our discussion the importance of science communication. And I think we hear about how science communication is important a lot. And my thought was that people will pay attention to pretty much anything as long as you make it interesting. Like you think about baseball statistics or sabermetrics, and that's really boring, except for that Moneyball made it interesting. And so then people started paying attention to it. And I think one of the interesting things that came up this morning was that we can actually make climate science interesting. Like, I was pretty excited when we got to see some clips. I love watching clips. And so we got to see the clip from the NOVA presentation and from the Showtime presentation. And both of those, I think, are things that appeal to a mainstream audience. And once you get people's attention, people, I think, are going to support the action. But I think the first thing is that I don't think you have to dumb things down. And I don't think it's a matter of needing to be out and putting more information out there. I think it's just a matter of making the information that's out there into an interesting format like we saw this morning.
What I was going to say adds to what she just said. Since I'm a rising junior at my university, and I know that there's this huge theme of communicating what's going on here in DC, like, spreading it out everywhere, what's going on with the legislation, what are some of the issues we face, and at a university level, like, sure, these issues are out there, they're like concentrated to like a select group of students who are actually interested in this, but it's okay for us to like repeat this information, because I know, like, for me at least, I always thought that this information was already out there, so it felt like redundant for me to just summarize it and share it with someone. But after this summit, like, I realized that it is really important, and it's okay to not really regurgitate what's going around, but like spreading the word does make a big difference, especially as the sense and need for stronger communities is going to be a big thing in the future.
Yeah, so when you discussed what a climate change resilient democracy is going to look like, what kinds of ideas emerged from those conversations?
I guess we didn't give you guys a lot of time to go through all these questions, so any other responses in general? There's a lot more of you who haven't spoken, so we might cold call.
No. I talked enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I've heard before and I've heard again here, and I'll definitely take it home with me as well as back to the office, is that one of the biggest disadvantages we inflict upon ourselves is a lack of imagination, especially with systems challenges like this that require system solutions. So I personally work in defense. It's not the most imaginative place, but it can be, and it starts with one person. So I'll be more imaginative.
Is it here? We talked about the importance of economic justice and how it should be an overarching part of this whole discussion.
I just thought a climate resilient democracy might start with legislatures meeting and being housed on small islands.
You got to say that again. So for me, I didn't realize that there were more deaths from heat waves and heat-related incidents than from any other extreme weather events combined. For me, that was a new fact. Also, I thought the talk this morning was interesting about from Harriet Tregoning, where I think it's great that there are a number of advancements that are being made, and there are connections between agencies, which it seems like there should be, and that should happen more often. And so it seems like there are a lot of plans in the works, so hopefully they will come to pass.
The remark concerning the small islands just made me think about something. You can show sometimes on small islands how things work, like sediments held back in a reservoir cause on a small river, the river is drying out and the delta is drying out and the beaches diminish. You can see that right away. So you see climate change in a small, it's like it's a laboratory case. You can see the effects very good. So islands could be a good way to look at climate change too.
Hi. So I'm doing my fellowship at EPA and working on climate, so there's a lot I can take back. But the environmental justice issues are something that I have been working on in my fellowship, and this summit really underscored to me how important that is, and that EPA is committed to that and does make resources available to make sure those voices are at the table. So me as a low-level fellow can make sure that I take advantage of those resources and make sure that and assert, at the level that I can, assert that those voices need to be at the table in all the discussions that I'm a part of. And also I would invite the woman from the Defense Department to come talk to me, because EPA and Defense have worked together in the past, and we can continue to work together to get new ideas. So.
I wanted to say that that one of the things that I took away from this is it's really clear that some of the more exciting things are happening at the local level, and we were talking about governance in this conference, and clearly governance at the bottom is working in many cases and becomes examples for other cities and other towns. And rather than bemoan the lack of good governance and the lack of leadership at some higher levels, as if we're sort of waiting for manna from heaven or something, be pleased with and push forward on what we do have, which is really active local level initiatives and change and examples for that. And the second thing that I wanted to add on to what a former speaker said was, I was really struck as well by, I knew about heat wave deaths and I knew about the Paris example, et cetera, but I didn't know the full statistics until Sabrina presented them today of how many people die from heat-related deaths, not only in the developed world, but my guess is around the world. But I do know from other work I've done in environmental health, there are a lot of environmental implications of climate change and the warming that we're seeing, and that might be something that we might want to add if you were to have a second thought, is having people from NIH or World Health Organizations or those kinds of things, because that wasn't as discussed here, is actual how does it affect the health of myself and my family and my community, besides just my property.
And it sounds like that's also a very effective way of communicating with the public about what can be anticipated.
So building on the comments that were made about the small island states and how to implement some of this into our democracy, I think that less on the lines of climate change, but more on the lines of just carbon pollution and from a health aspect, to send anyone in Congress to a capital city in a developing country and send them there for just a week or two and have them not use taxis, but actually walk around and really breathe air. I mean, I just came back from Addis Ababa. I was in Dakar before that, and the air quality in some of those places is just, you feel it, you see it, you feel it, and it makes us, I think, understand some of the benefits of a Clean Air Act that works. But, so that was just to sort of build on that idea. One of the things that we also talked about in our group was the idea of environmental shocks not necessarily being an opportunity for communities to build back better. Oftentimes that's a very appealing thought process, but there needs to be a lot of pre-staging in advance of the disaster to allow for those communities to kind of have a game plan in place to understand what their vision for building back better means. And I think to get there, we really do need to have some of those agencies and arms of the government that are charged with disaster response to be better engaged with our communities in the pre-disaster phase of planning for what we want our realities and our futures to look like.
I want to actually also relate to that international theme, and I really appreciated the references that several presenters have made to the fact that climate change is not a uniquely U.S. issue, it's a global phenomenon, and that this is an issue that countries are dealing with different success. And in terms of governance, of course, we complain a lot, and justly so, I think, about the dysfunction of our own governments, but there are many governments that are far worse, and it's interesting to consider how we can actually work with those governments on these issues, and how some of the lessons, especially from local communities, could be related to countries struggling with this. And I particularly related actually to the comment that was mentioned the issue of funding that was mentioned multiple times, that it's much easier to get disaster relief funding than it is to get something for prevention, because we find the same thing in terms of international humanitarian assistance. There is an effort, for example, right now between the Department of State and USAID to provide a shift for countries like Kenya and Pakistan, a number of others, who for decades receive humanitarian assistance but haven't been able to actually develop a good response to those droughts and floods that occur regularly, to shift to development assistance and actually build more, a better capacity. And yet, in terms of funding, that is finding the same roadblocks in Congress as we have in terms of domestic programs.
Okay, well, thank you all for the contribution of these ideas and your participation the last 2 days. And I'm now going to turn the mic over to Darshan in preparation for our closing remarks.
How about a round of applause for our awesome participants?